Okay, I'll
Welcome,
put the
everybody. This is the latest in the Enterprise DNA Roundtable series that we're focusing on career issues. And I've got a very esteemed panel with me today. I've got Paul Lucassen from Lucassen Consulting, Rick Groot, founder of Gorilla BI, and George Mount, founder of Stringfest Analytics. So three very successful BI consultants who've made the leap from different parts of the data sphere into independent consulting. And so what I wanted to do was just go around the horn here and ask each of them to talk a little bit about kind of what they do and the nature of their work before we jump into a kind of broad discussion.
Sounds great, Brian.
So Rick, you want to start us out?
Sure, I can start out. So I'm Rick. For the last 5 years or so, it's been fun. Those 5 years have gone quick. For 5 years, I've done a lot of BI consulting. And the interesting part about the transition was that I had a finance background, and that BI part somehow just got into this daily workflow over time. And for the last 5 years, I've helped a lot of customers transition from their financial reports. So you can see those often in the accounting departments or business control. And specifically those reports are often interesting in companies to automate or visualize in certain ways because it comes back on a weekly basis. So it's been a process where both knowledge of the BI part and finance has been very beneficial. And over time, that's moved from just the Power BI part, also looking into a bit of a broader perspective. Perspectives like getting some knowledge about data warehousing, about how can we set up big projects and not just do the front-end visualization. So I guess on a high level, the BI projects have always had some sort of focus on both finance and BI, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rick. Paul, you want to jump in now?
Yeah, well, as you know, my background is transportation and logistics. And as such, I've been working in companies in that field for many, many years. And at some point, I was more and more interested in data. And you'll find that particularly in logistics, people have a vast amount of data, but there wasn't a lot done with it. So I decided to focus more on that. And instead of doing general management, I decided to focus much more on doing analysis and visualization. So I started off with Excel, Power Pivot, and subsequently moved into Power BI. And after that, developed much more in Power BI and specializing in GIS applications in Power BI. So I do a lot of mapping and associated work like network, infrastructure, restructuring, and things like that.
Great. And George?
Yes, I'm George Mount from Stringfest Analytics. I've been on my own for about 3 years now. I started, like a lot of people, as a clueless analyst and wanted to know why I was so clueless and what I could do to make organizations a little less clueless. And we can talk about the tactics that I took to get into full-time work, but a lot of it is helping those people who, for whatever reason, are in a data heavy role and they just need the resources to do things a little better. And with so much discussion now about competing on analytics and retaining your talent, because so many people are leaving or wanting to leave their jobs, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. There's such an interesting connection between data literacy and analytics competency and the job market and how businesses compete.
Great. So what do you think it was for each of you that kind of prompted you to make that jump from a prior role into the kind of independent consulting world?
Yeah, for me, I started in more of a finance kind of background, and I think that's pretty typical. It sounds like Rick's the same, and I think there's a good partnership between especially coming from a Power BI bent, which a lot of us are here, and Excel and the finance and accounting world. Those kind of go hand in hand nicely. That was something that I had never done as a student. I was in a very Excel focused kind of a position, and I was just not good at it. And I'm just a productivity fanatic. Everything has to be done, the right way, the optimal way. And I knew that it wasn't being done that way at my job. So I started blogging about it. I always enjoyed writing, and it was just more of a, personal diary about what I learned that day in Excel, basically. And that just kind of snowballed and snowballed. And later on, I started getting more interested in other analytics tools. So, stuff like Python or R, learn a little bit more about databases and data warehouses and all that. And from there, it all kind of funneled back from the blog. And I just found that what I was doing there was getting interest from others, that it was enough interest that I could get, paid for it. And it provided me more interesting work and more fulfilling work. I think, when you're on your own, you can kind of choose what you want to pursue, and you have a little more usually weight when you work with people about, they tend to take you more seriously when you're, kind of that outside expert. So that's really how it all came for me, that, and I could see that I could focus on what I really like about analytics and have that kind of potential to do what I wanted and how I wanted to do it. That's what got me into this line of work, really.
It's interesting, kind of a slow transition as you started developing more independence in the blog. And
yeah, it took a long time. I mean, I started the blog in 2014 or 2015, something like that. And it kind of came and went in fits and starts. And, you look at some of my earlier posts, and I wouldn't think they're that good at this point, and they're not all really on a theme. It was just kind of a grab bag of things. But over time, I was able to validate what I was really interested in, what people kind of know me for. And I think at this point now, I'm kind of known for the person who has that Excel background, but will layer on other tools. So, for example, later today, I'm speaking to the Toronto meetup on how to use Python with Excel, right? Because that's a very, very popular topic right now. So, finding that niche, wherever, if you're interested in doing, this kind of consulting work, finding some kind of niche like that, where maybe you're taking 2 or 3 technologies and kind of, layering them and see where you can fit in and provide value. That's a great opportunity too. There are only more and more ways to kind of mix and match all of these different analytics tools. We talk about converged analytics and all that kind of thing. So that's a great way in too, to, take a couple things that you're good at and combine them in a way that nobody else has yet.
And Paul, that was kind of your experience, right? That you were a long time kind of in the corporate world, and then kind of combine that with you.
Yeah, well, I needed a challenge. At the time I was 60 years old, and basically having done management roles in smaller and bigger transportation companies, I just wanted to do something else, particularly not being involved in people management, but much more associated with the data. So I decided to set up on my own. And it wasn't really a challenge, if you like, in so much that given my network, it was relatively easy to find work and subsequently develop myself, started to train myself whilst doing it, got involved with Enterprise DNA, and so started doing the courses, whilst at the same time doing my work. And that worked out fine. And then it goes from mouth to mouth. And I agree with George, you need to have a niche. And my niche, of course, is the GIS applications with the mapping. So I always said I'm a consultant with a product because I deliver them the maps, and that's what I do, and that works out fine. And that is successful till today because there's many people who are obviously developing in similar directions, but most of them are really from a financial background, and there are not that many people with a logistics background who got involved into Power BI and subsequently became a consultant.
And we'll definitely get back, Paul. I want to pick up on that logistics theme in a minute. But Rick, I want to kind of see with you in terms of coming from the finance world, kind of what prompted you to make that jump.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I think my path looked a little bit like the one George had, because I remember that I was like employed somewhere. And for me, I always enjoyed the creation of reports. And back then it was mostly Excel. And I would always Google things and how can I make things more efficient? How can I make these reports more automatic with VBA, for example? And I remember at some point the company that I worked at was going to implement Power BI for the customers. Basically, they offered a product where they would collect stamps, and they wanted to offer their customers dashboards that showed those stamps in Power BI. And I always got super curious about that. And during lunch, I would usually talk with the consultants. And at some point, they asked, like, Rick, wouldn't this be great for your finance department? Don't you want to start with something like that? So they introduced me to it, and then slowly but surely I picked up on Power Query. That started with Power Pivot as well, some cube formula. So it was very Excel based. Then at some point I actually graduated, and my study was 4 days a week. It was mostly working, and I would only study for 1 day a week for over 6 years. So when those 6 years were over, I remember so well, the day after I graduated, I resigned my job to start a consulting business. And the main reason for me was that things were getting a little bit repetitive in work. So we had done big transitions. We had to become SOX compliant. We had to make big reports. But at some point, if you have your month-end closings, it's a little bit of the same trick every month. And I felt that the creation of the reports was fun, but the repetitive part got less interesting. And then a friend of mine asked, like, hey, Rick, why don't you start consulting? You seem to like the change. You seem to like building up things and then just leaving them behind so a company gets happy and you can move forward. And then as I resigned, it was of course super scary, but I had a bit of a network. And within the first week, I had my first project. And I remember then there were very little consultants that did Power BI. And I was able to do some interim work combining Power BI and the financial roles.
And what year was that, Rick?
That was 2016.
Wow, yeah, so it's pretty early in the Power BI days.
And that's how it went. And I guess what relates to what George just said was that for a lot of customers, after we did the consulting, they always wanted to have some sort of manual. And I would write those manuals for them, sure. But I always felt that these same problems, probably other companies would have too. And it would be such a waste to have to rewrite those manuals again and again. So at some point, I just started the blog and started sharing the knowledge that I wanted to teach to customers, basically.
And that's, that's one of the things that kind of amazes me is that, just with the technology now between YouTube and blogging, if you've got content to offer and really things to say, you've immediately got a platform and a following, that it's, there's really no barrier to entry. And, I think that's one of the things, even just the past few years I've noticed is just the proliferation of really great content, coming out from all across the world. But I wanted to, so it sounds like for you guys, it's been a pretty smooth transition. I wanted to talk about challenges and, what are some of the difficult things you had to address in kind of getting started and, kind of getting the business rolling?
If I start, well, basically, I was just lucky. Like Rick, I just quit the job and I started. And at the time, I was a director for a transportation company and responsible for sales. So I just stopped and I started doing this thing. One of my first customers in the first week as well was Dutch Post. I had contacts through my network with them, and I started to do all sorts of Power BI projects. And it developed and developed, starting off with Excel, subsequently moving into Power BI. And after that, I got many more other customers from my network, but also associated with people who I came across. Because the one thing I found that getting involved in Power BI also meant that I actually entered a completely different network. And I started to talk to people and meet people who were in a completely different environment than that I was used to in transportation. So that was not a challenge, but it was the fun of being able to contact so many people, keep track of what everyone was doing. And up to today, it's still a learning curve every day again. And that's what I enjoy, and that's what makes things, I guess, interesting for customers as well. Because if you continue to develop yourself, every time you come to a returning customer and you've got some new ideas, that is what binds them to you.
I think, Paul, what you said about getting bored, is something that's always been a challenge for me in, whatever work I've done, that after a few years, things start to feel repetitive. And this is the one area I've been in that it never seemed repetitive. Every day there's something new to learn. There's new challenges, that no two problems ever come across as quite the same.
True.
I recognize that, Brian. And also with every new update, I guess there's new approaches you can do, or you can expand your technology stack to include some other languages or other tools.
Yeah.
You can make it as crazy as you want. And then still you got to be creative enough to set things together in a style that your customers like, or maybe that challenges you to think differently. So it's almost like a never ending thing.
Yeah. You never can get to the end of this book.
Yeah, true.
What about Rick and George? What about some of the challenges you guys faced?
I guess there's two things here that are challenging in the beginning. So one of the first things is, of course, finding your value. Because in the beginning, if you've not done any consulting before, perhaps you're not very sure what you can charge or what is common in the market, or perhaps you're still finding out how much value you actually bring. And of course, if you want to do some consulting somewhere, it would be good if you have an idea of if you're a beginner level and what kind of roles would fit with that. And I think you only find out if you try, and if you're open about this, and just tell people what you know and what you don't know, and go from there. And a problem-solving attitude, of course, helps there. Now, the second biggest part, and I'm sometimes still thinking about that one, but the next part is finding out what kind of roles fit you. And I'm saying that because you could start consulting and be very like a specialist, and you could have the deep knowledge and only work on a very small area. But I've also, for example, been involved in broader projects where you're more like the project manager also. You might be the one that, for example, talks with your customer, that also talks with the user of the reports if you work with Power BI. But before you get to that stage, of course, if a customer doesn't have any data warehousing solution yet, perhaps you should also be the one that helps out in thinking how to build that and what the requirements are. And of course, a role like that is very different from being an analyst, for example. And if you want to transition to a more broader role, I guess you also need some more knowledge, and perhaps need to slowly get experience in data warehousing and bigger projects. So for me, there is three tastes of roles that you could have. So you could either be the specialist in form of an analyst or just building part of the solution. You could be a generalist that does sort of project management and gets everything together and knows a bit about everything. Or thirdly, I guess you could also work like in a big team. You could start your consulting company and get a little bit of everything together and deliver that. And before you really know which of the ones you wanna jump into, I think that's also trial and error, and see what fits you.
And which one do you prefer, Rick?
I'm struggling with that a little bit, Paul, because I've done a bit of both. I've done the big projects where everything had to be set up still, which also caused a bit of a headache sometimes. And sometimes I've been the specialist, just doing the detailed part about optimizing and really getting the reports out there. And I think I like doing a little bit of both. Right. A little bit of both, maybe.
And you, George?
Yeah, as far as the challenges go, the expression "Rome wasn't built in a day" comes to mind. It takes a while, and you do need to have nerves of steel, because there are going to be periods of variability. Sometimes they're going to be quiet, sometimes we'll be busy, and it can be really easy to get too caught up in that kind of feast or famine cycle. But you need to think longer term, because not everything's going to happen overnight. And hey, you're a data analyst, so you need to bring that same spirit to your business itself. If something doesn't work, you just have to think, well, the data is telling me, it's not about you, it's about the data. Let's try something else. So you really have to keep a really detached frame of mind to what you're working on. Of course, that's the same in any project, or it should be, but you're obviously a lot more invested literally when it's your own business. So that kind of attitude is all the more important. So that's kind of the challenges in terms of the attitude you bring to it. In terms of what I focus on, I'm often kind of the person called in for some of the more niche kind of applications. Maybe there's some kind of little feature or request or some kind of ad hoc thing that needs some kind of statistical model built, or some kind of data needs to be pulled in, and you're going to need Python or something like that to automate something or other, interface with some other application. I do a lot of training and teaching and things like that. I have a book that recently came out this year, so that was a lot of work. I mean, books don't really make a lot of money, but they are really good marketing tools. And I'm working on a second one right now. So a lot of that kind of content development is a lot of my portfolio of business and marketing. And I would say that it's totally legitimate and it's a valuable part of a business. It certainly, when you're getting into this, you may think, well, like, oh, training or teaching, oh, that doesn't sound very, very lucrative. And those who can't do teach, and all this kind of old saws about that. But then you talk to people in the space, and you find that a lot of people will only do teaching or training because it's very repeatable, right? I mean, you don't have to wait on a unique set of requirements. You're not sitting around waiting for the client's data set or anything like that. You have your self-contained workshop, and then you just go and present it. And so it's a can be a lot more stress-free of a way to go about things. So just be open-minded, see what people value you for. And if people seem to enjoy your teaching style, there's certainly a space for that. If you find out that you work well in one of the types of gigs that Rick described, go for it. There's such a wide open space, but you do kind of have to find your niche, and also have the kind of open-mindedness to see where that data takes you.
You guys have all hit on something. There's a question I get really frequently from people who are just kind of thinking about starting in on this, which is, they're kind of concerned about, if they've got a particular specialty, they're concerned about, do I define myself kind of tightly around that specialty, or do I kind of market and frame myself as more of a generalist? And kind of, when is it too early to kind of define yourself based on that particular niche? And I wonder if you guys have thoughts on that.
Well, I think you almost, in a way, need to be redefining and reevaluating where you stand pretty frequently, because the field changes so much, and everybody's job is going to be different, so yours is going to be the same. But as far as I have this debate with myself a lot, in terms of the kind of generalist versus specialist discussion. And I think a lot of it just comes down to what you're interested in. There's really no right answer. I'm not smart enough to know what specific technology is, or what feature is going to be really in demand or something like that. So I don't think it's a real wise idea to try to like target one specific thing. So, I think there may be something to be said for diversification, but on the other hand, there's that idea of diversification, right? Where if you spread across too many things, that's not great either. Be adaptable. I mean, that's, not much of an answer, but it's really the only answer that one can have in such a rapidly changing field.
Yeah, I agree. I consider myself a specialist, basically because I just cannot keep all balls in the air, given that I also do the development of GIS software. So you've got a few of these things that you need to look after. So I decided to be much more of a specialist, try and keep away from the real IT stuff and deal with the data, with the analysis, with the reporting, with the GIS application if required. And I do other jobs as well. So I also have projects, currently working for a project in flowers. So it's completely different from transportation, if you like. But this is one of the spin-offs of the network that you get. But I try and be the specialist, because then at least I know that, because that's me, that what I specialize in is something that I have under control. And that makes me feel comfortable. And it pays my bills.
There's clearly a big demand for that specialty. How about you, Rick?
I have two diverging thoughts about this, actually. Like one of the topics, I think George slightly mentioned it earlier, that there's a lot of finance people going into Power BI. But at least I notice in the Dutch market that if they're looking for consultants that do Power BI, having that mix between finance and being a good programmer, they don't see it that much. So I'm getting a lot of calls where I have to say that I'm not available because I have too many projects going on. So on the one hand, I'd like to think like, hey, if you have this combination of, for example, finance and Power BI, I feel like there's a demand for that in the current market. On the other hand, I've been considering focusing more on the financial reporting in Power BI, and then thinking of things like profit and loss statements, balance sheet, cash flow, because those are so specific to accounting, and there's all kinds of things you got to think about before you can develop that. You could really jump into a niche, and especially if people are going to want any of those reports, it's going to be much more likely that they find you. So in that sense, jumping into a niche is going to make you the person in the area for it. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, the big question is, do you always want to associate with those kind of projects? Because to me, it also sounds kind of boring to always do the same kind of thing and maybe roll it out quicker and quicker. But it's kind of nice to have a challenge sometimes, right? So it's a little bit, yeah, you have to see how the demand is in the area where you're at. And as long as it's fun, sure, go with that. And then that niche might help you in getting the projects quicker. That's my thoughts.
That's really, really interesting ideas on that topic. As I say, it's something I get a lot of questions on. I think your guys' perspective is really valuable. I wanted to ask kind of how the pandemic has changed things for you, both in terms of, I know, from a logistics standpoint, obviously it's changed a lot of things, but also from the standpoint of, kind of in-person versus remote, kind of how people look at training, look at work in general. George and I were just talking about that, this morning. So just interested from your business perspectives, kind of how the last, 18 months or so has changed, or maybe not.
Well, if I talk about the Netherlands, I don't know what Rick's experience is. Last year, say around March, April, I noted a decline in projects, basically because we couldn't meet. People were scared. They didn't know what the financial consequences could be. So for a short period, say 3-4 months, I had very little to do. And then suddenly after that, it exploded again because they all wanted to have their things and their projects run anyhow. And then it came all back. So I just had a bit of a blow, if you like, for a period of 3 or 4 months where it was much more quiet than I was used to. But after that, it just picked up and it's still here.
Did the nature of the work change at all, Paul?
Sorry?
Did the nature of the work change? Was there?
No, not really. I mean, the nature changed probably because you even did more remotely than you did before. But in general, I'm working from home most of the time anyhow, unless it's a kickoff meeting or a final presentation. So that didn't change too much for me in my line of business. I certainly did a lot less mileage than I used to do before. I can tell that from my car because normally I do about 40,000 a year, which is already less than what I used to do. And this year, I think I did something like 20,000. So I actually do a lot less driving, but I enjoy that because I wanted to give up being in traffic jams anyhow. And one of the things I can assure you is once I started as a business consultant, the first thing I found was that almost every day I gained 3 hours, because instead of standing in traffic and driving to Utrecht every day, I suddenly started to work from home. And that was a bonus.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have found that to be true.
I think this also is very related to how you enjoy the working from home. For me, for example, I get a lot of energy from being around people, and especially if you just get into a new company to help them out. For me, it helps to be present because I overhear things. People more easily come up to you. And also, if you're having a coffee, you'll more easily start talking with somebody that you haven't spoken to before. Whereas if you're home, of course, you don't have that as much. So for me, having worked from home for almost 1.5 years, I noticed that I started searching for other people that were in the same market to see if perhaps we could work from a shared space somewhere. So at least we could have the socializing, we could share knowledge, but still have a feeling that at least we can go to work a little bit in that sense. So that's been a change for me on that end. And of course, I've tried to make a fantastic workplace at home by upgrading my equipment with new cameras, with new microphones, a nice screen and a chair, just to make it feel a little bit like a good place to work from home, right?
I want to work from your home, Rick.
You're welcome to come sometime, right? You were planning on visiting Utrecht, you told me, right?
Yeah.
You just let me know when you're here, and I'll give you a little tour, and
Yeah,
I'll see if
wonderful.
we can work out you working from here one day.
Wonderful. How about you, George? Has it changed things a bit?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've never had a local client. Everything's been across the country, from sea to shining sea, but just not here in Cleveland. And for better or worse, I mean, I don't have much of a reference point working with a client online versus in person because it's all been online. I will say that with the changes in which how everybody's been working, I would say that there's more demand for things like automation and, reporting and things like that, because, people have to figure it out themselves if they're working from home. And, you have to rely on reports if you don't have the kind of water cooler talk that you might have had in the past. And I think that organizations are cognizant of people not feeling connected with others, not feeling like they can do their work efficiently, and they're trying to upskill that and just kind of put data literacy more to the front of how organizations are run. I'm seeing more and more organizations starting their own boot camps or analytics academies, and I would certainly expect that to continue. That's a lot of what I do, and a lot of it's online, so that's something that I'm familiar with. And so that part's pretty interesting. It's funny you mentioned that poll, Brian, about, I think I've only got like 30 votes so far, about, do you expect in the future, there will be more self-employed data professionals? And, the overall, I think it was like 90+% of people agreed with that. And, of course, as a data analyst myself, I have to think, well, why is that true? Can I get data telling me if that's true or not now, this and that? But it's an interesting space. And I think having these conversations are the first part of doing that analysis, and how that kind of what the relationship between that and remote work is also pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think it's going to be fascinating to see kind of how this plays out long term. But I'm wondering, if you had somebody come up to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about making this sort of transition, what do you think would be the biggest piece of advice you would give them in, kind of from looking back on your experience, either something you do different or something you did that worked out really well, that you would kind of say, this is my number one lesson learned?
Number one lesson: be confident, because when you start, you think, do I know enough? And most of the time you find that in that particular field that you're working in, you can tell other people what you think is right for their business. And if that turns out to be successful, that's the first step to lose the insecurity and find that you can actually make a living out of what you do. And it's different for people at a younger age than when you're older and you're much more settled. But I guess for each of us, it's a matter of making sure that people value you, that you feel confident in being able to deliver. And from there, you can step up and develop yourself.
Good advice.
That's a great point, Paul. I think that's very helpful because a lot of us are insecure when they're starting out. And I think on top of that, maybe a good first step would also be to consider not going full-time right away. Because if you're not confident at the beginning, I mean, if you are, feel free to take that jump right away. But if it's something you've been doubting about, why not start doing some projects for just a day or two a week? There's plenty of those kind of projects available. And yeah, you can see if that works for you and what the first experience is in doing these client talks. And if that works out, you could probably extend or get some new projects going. And that should make it quite easy to get started, I think.
Yeah, it's great idea.
Yeah, like I mentioned, everything that I've landed, almost everything has come from the blog. So my first advice to somebody interested is always, start writing down what you know and sharing it. Or it doesn't even have to be written. I mean, it could be videos, meetups, whatever, but just share as much knowledge as you can. It seems counterintuitive because, if you know a lot of stuff, then why do it for free? That basic idea, but there is a way to share what you know and really think of yourself as a community. I think that, I love to see how much more careers related content we're doing here at Enterprise DNA, because it just benefits everybody for us to think of ourselves as a community of experts who are sharing knowledge with each other. It's such a win-win. So get into that mentality. Know that you're never going to know everything, but at the same time, nobody else is either. So there's really nothing to lose for you to share what you know and learn from others, and then kind of take it from there. And using some of the processes and steps that we were discussing earlier in terms of what niche cover, whether to specialize this and that, you can kind of converge to some space in your neck of the woods in the data field. But that's really the thing that served me the most, is just to get out there and don't be afraid. And I guess that does get into the confidence level too, about not being afraid to start sharing what you know and working with people about it.
And I think to add to that, that's a great point, George. I think to add to that, on the one hand, of course, not everybody knows everything. And I remember when I started out, I actually thought that if I did the consulting, I really wanted to be able to deliver and solve the problems. So if things didn't work out or I just didn't know the answer, it would take a little while for me to actually admit and say like, hey, I don't know this, but I'll figure it out. And over time, I've just noticed that for me, it's been really helpful to just admit it, to say like, hey, I don't exactly know how to fix this right now, but I'm sure we'll find a way to do it, and to just brainstorm on it together. And once I let that go, for me, it's been really much more easygoing. So in a way, yeah, you have to be confident, but also you don't have to know everything. They don't expect you to know everything either. And neither do the employees, where probably at the client, not all of them know it either. So in that sense, be confident, but also, yeah, be open if you don't know stuff. Yeah, and we're not always in it alone, I guess. Yeah, because we also have a community around us that can help us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's good advice what you said, Rick, about probably starting doing work for just 2 or 3 days a week. Because most people, when they start off on their own, their first sort of reaction is that I need to find a job for another 3 or 6 months and have that role. But then it turns out to be just another job. And it's much more challenging to work for different companies for a couple of days, do small projects, because you develop yourself and you give yourself the time to continue to study in those fields where you are probably weaker. So from the moment I started in Power BI and actually becoming the Power BI consultant that I am today, I've always reserved 1 day per week for training. And I've continued to do that until today. So at least 1 day a week, I'm doing my self-training, study, and that keeps me on my feet, makes me happy. And at the same time, I can make the money in 2 or 3 days as well as that I probably could in 4 or 5 days, but it's a much more relaxed life.
That's great, Paul. And it really, the field moves so quickly these days that if you're not making that time to keep up, you can get quickly behind. So that's fantastic advice.
Yeah, that's what George said as well. I mean, this is changing almost every day. So you need to try and keep track. And this is why I consider myself a specialist, because I try to focus on a limited number of things, because otherwise you simply cannot keep it up.
Yeah.
And I guess in a way, it's what George and I are doing too with the blog. Because if I want to write interesting content, I need to research it, and I want to add some extra value that you might not find on the internet straight away.
Yeah.
So it forces me to actually think of for a blog post like, hey, what kind of things are interesting that I don't know about yet? And what can I do to actually get to know that? Do I read forums? Do I experiment myself? Do I ask others around me? So if you like that kind of thing, start a blog as well. And you're going to also accelerate your own learning by being able to explain it to others.
Oh, I find that to the nth degree, Rick, that even when I'm teaching something that I think is pretty elementary, going back and developing the materials to teach it, invariably I learn, even if it's stuff I think I know backwards and forwards, I invariably learn new stuff about it. That explaining and teaching is one of the best ways to learn, I think.
Yeah, it's all about development, self-development as well. I recall that when I did my first video, and as you know, I've done a course on geospatial analysis. Those first videos actually were a mirror, because I suddenly realized that I know my stuff, and this is how I do it for my customers, but it's completely different. And I know Rick knows that as well from his videos. It's completely different when you have to explain it to someone else, because you record it, you watch it, and you think, nobody's going to understand this. I have to do it again. And that's the learning curve with doing the videos and the courses. I've never been blogging, so I have no experience whatsoever with that type of thing. But I know that the videos and recording the videos were definitely something that boosted me as well.
Yeah, it's a really good chance to
and that's about sharing. Yeah, that's about sharing, as George quite rightful said. It's all about sharing. Do not be afraid to share your knowledge, because you pick something up from someone else as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to be honest, if you learn something new, I've caught myself writing about a certain topic or making a video, and then months later, I'm struggling with a similar problem, and I just don't remember that I wrote the blog post or made the video. And I find out landing on my own blog post and thinking like, did I write this?
Yeah.
So it's also good to archive it for yourself, I guess.
Yeah.
And I've had people also say like, Rick, why do you share all these things for free? You're giving your knowledge away. And I tell them like, of course we're giving knowledge away, and that's okay, we're sharing. But it's not like everybody consolidates and has the same context as you have. So it's not like you give your position away as a consultant in any way. So I encourage everybody to share for free as well. And of course you could provide courses too, but at least let's see if we can give some back to the community as well. I think that would be good for everyone.
Yeah,
I completely agree. And George has a very funny meme about finding your own content is the answer to your question. And it definitely happens to all of us, I think. But we've talked a lot about lessons learned and challenges. I want to talk a little bit before we go about successes, and, kind of give each of you the chance to talk about a time when the work you did really allowed a client to see their business or their decisions in a completely different light, and kind of how that changed things for them, and, what that experience was like. Because I think as a consultant, that's the best experience you can have, is when you really cause that light bulb to go on for somebody and have them see things in a way they didn't before. And so I wanted to let you guys talk about, kind of those particular experiences.
Yes, a lot of my favorites have something to do with optimization, where an organization is struggling with meeting some kind of objective, or they just have kind of a hunch that things are not as efficient as they could be, and getting them into, so for example, I recently did one on fleet optimization for vehicles, and when should these organizations retire vehicles after how many miles. It just give them some basic rules of thumb for that kind of thing. And peeling back processes like that seem really complex to someone, and showing them that it's actually not too hard to quantify all of those things and count everything and build a model that gets you to a point where you can start making rules of thumbs and making decisions on the data. So, taking something that just seems way too complex to ever really understand and boiling it into, maybe 3 or 4 KPIs or variables or something like that they can then, kind of see it as a representation and then improve and, save a lot of money in the process doing that. Those are really my favorite kind of consulting projects. Also, I've helped through some of these boot camps and other things, probably, like hundreds, if not more, analysts get into the field, and having that new wave of analysts, if we can get every organization staffed up with analysts who are excited about what they're doing, and that we all see ourselves as a community who actually want to learn and grow together. Talking about memes, I can just see that kind of meme of the future with all the, flying cars and all the, prosperity. So I think that's really an exciting thing to, get the analyst community to kind of step up and really take the lead on building the future.
Paul, Rick, any particular successes you want to talk about?
Well, I guess that what I've come across even today is that big or small companies seem to be totally disconnected from their data, and they do their day-to-day thing, think they are successful. Sometimes they are successful, but most of the time you surprise them with the outcome of the analysis, and then subsequently being able to work into improvement and show them how they can continue to analyze and visualize what they are doing is rewarding. It's good for those companies, but it's always the same thing almost. You get a lot of data, everybody tell you that they've got great data, and then you find out that it will take you days before the data is up to where you would expect it to be when you started. And this is how it works. So that's also a bit of advice to those people who start on their own. Don't think that they throw a bit of data at you that is absolutely perfect, because it's the opposite.
Yeah, you always spend much more time cleaning data than you think you're going to.
Yeah. Is it the same with you, Rick?
Well, some of the topics that come to mind about successes. I mean, the 2 easy successes for me are when you come in and in the first week, you already saved them like 30 or 40 hours a week on certain repetitive work. That's an easy success.
Yeah.
Also, reports that take 20 seconds to render for a certain page, to get that back to under 2 seconds. Also a great easy success on optimization. But if we talk a little bit more about the parts that really energize me in that sense, it's often in the process mining area. So you could, for example, have a company that maybe sells hearing aids. Somebody comes for a test, and well, if everything is all right, they might get a hearing aid on their ears. They might have a process where the customer wears that for, let's say, 2 weeks. After those 2 weeks, you expect them to come back, make an appointment, and see if it turns into a sale, yes or no. I find it very interesting to delve into these different steps and see if they actually follow company policy. If so, how long does every step take, and is that according to policy as well? And do actually the salespeople, for example, help people within an hour, or do they book 2-hour appointments? And it's not to say that we have to be the big brother is watching you, but it's good to have an idea where in the process things are smooth and where perhaps things are different than you expected. And from my experience, making these things visible really shows companies how the processes really work. And often they have different expectations that are just wild guesses. And for me, that's often where the biggest value is brought, because it's not easy to do it in your BI solution. So after you prep your data and you actually get it together, that's where I actually also feel like, yes, I've delivered and I can be proud of this.
Yeah, that's a good win. So we're getting close to the top of the hour. I don't want to take you guys away for too long, but George had mentioned kind of about the future and kind of what the future looks like. And I wanted to close on whether, each of you has kind of one prediction about where you see kind of the future of the analytics field going, and, kind of trends you see, or, changes you see coming down the road that you think are going to be important in this field.
Well, that's hard to tell, because, as we said, that things are so rapidly changing that how far is the future?
Right.
What you see is, of course, continued automation. The level of self-service business intelligence, as Microsoft always names it, is stunning and is developing still. So I guess that a lot of things will be much more automated, but that never sort of declines the role of the analyst, who's able to see the link between what the customer wants, the data, and the way that we need to process it. So I think there will be a continued role for the consultants and the analysts, but the world will be changing in terms of automation even further than it is today.
So the exact prediction for the BI market, I find that difficult.
Yeah.
But something that I've always had as a prediction, and I still see it coming, and maybe it's a little bit related, is I've always thought in the finance departments, there's always so much work that I feel is unnecessary. Things like, for example, sending invoices, getting them paid, and actually having to book the invoices when they come in. So I've always thought that in the market, there's going to be much more integration. And if I want to, for example, send you an invoice, then of course it needs to be paid in some way. So why not integrate this with the banking system as well? So that when it comes in, you know what the amount is. The customer can easily click to pay it, but it also doesn't need to be booked separately or printed in any way. What if all of that was connected and we could integrate different systems? I think that would make us more waterproof and also make the data much more accessible and less prone to getting lost in any way, or prone to mistakes. So I imagine systems are going to be integrated. That's all I want to leave for now.
Yeah, as far as the future, I would expect some of the things we already discussed to continue. Organizations putting more resources into developing the data talents of their team, further automation and making it easier for, almost thinking of data as like a product or an app. It almost sounds like what Rick is talking about is kind of, putting data products together, Power Apps, for example. I would say that I'm a little more contrarian when it comes to some of these low, no code and AI powered trends, right? Like, I think it's really easy to just kind of wave the magic wand and say that low code and AI is going to handle it. I think there's always going to be a need for customization. And when that happens, somebody needs to code it. So I will say that there's a continued need for those kind of rough and tumble technical skills. And I don't necessarily think that some of those are going to go away to the extent that it's often portrayed. So, a lot of analysts coming into the field, there's this message that some of those technical skills may not be as necessary. Depends on what you end up doing. So I wouldn't discount, understanding a bit of, like statistics or knowing how to use Python, stuff like that. Like those kind of bread and butter skills aren't going away, even though there's going to be more AI and more low code, no code kind of thing. And that's a whole other, expert discussion we could have. But I did want to kind of bring that up as, what I think what might not change in the next few years, right?
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, George, when they talked about kind of the natural language processing for DAX, and people said, "Oh, you're not going to need to know DAX." It's like, nah, I don't think that's going away anytime soon. That it's like, I don't think Siri is going to be writing my DAX anytime soon. But one of the things that really came out today is, kind of the importance of sharing with the community, and kind of thinking of ourselves as kind of one big data community. And I just really wanted to thank all you guys for taking the time and sharing your experience and expertise and insights. That I think this has been a very quick hour and kind of a fascinating discussion for me. I think it will be for many other folks. And so just really wanted to thank you for your time, and hope this won't be the last time that we get together and talk about these issues.
Thanks a lot for including us, Brian.
It was fun talking to you all.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Enterprise DNA TV. If you enjoyed the content covered in this particular tutorial, please throw the video a like. It really helps us and we really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Enterprise DNA TV channel. We have a huge amount of content coming out all the time from myself and a range of content creators, all dedicated to improving the way that you use Power BI and the Power Platform. Lastly, check out Enterprise DNA's website. Plenty of resources and further learning that you can access very easily. All the best. Take care.